Shall we? Welcome everyone. Today we dive into the future of automotive technology, where we have a very interesting discussion around how artificial intelligence is changing the landscape for designing in-cabin experiences for cars. And I am Palash Agrawal. I am a lead designer at Tata Elxsi, and I'm happy to host you for the session where I'll be moderating with our esteemed panelists. So I have Mr. Aurelian Doisy, who's the chief designer from Tata Motors European Design Center, and along with him, we do have Mr. Nick Talbot, who's the global head of design and innovation for Tata Elxsi, who will be sharing their experiences on how the AI is changing the whole landscape of the transformation that's happening in the car experiences. So as
Yeah.
we as we speak right now, I guess the car, it's safe to say that the in-cabin experiences around automotive is evolving. Now the cars are no longer just about going from point A to point B. It's a lot more than that, where like say now the car spaces could be imagined as a space where you work, where you watch a movie, where you play games, and many more things. And looking ahead, AI is definitely going to play a major role in terms of shaping how these experiences are going to be curated and then presented to the audience. So it brings a big opportunity for us to discuss with the industry stalwarts themselves, with Nick and Aurelian with us. And without further ado, let's hear from them in terms of what's their views on how to design better and more intuitive car HMIs. The first question, Aurelian, we've known the in-car experiences from quite some time through various touch points like the instrument clusters, all the interactions we do on the infotainment systems, in some products also the rear seat experiences and stuff, and that's continuously changing now. Do you see, with Tata Motors being on the cornerstone of all these future innovations happening in all of these touch points, and also exploring newer product lines with Avinia, Sierra, and all those products? How do you see AI is revolutionizing this particular area of the experience components?
So, hi, thanks for the question. I think it's a very challenging question, and I wouldn't, necessarily, let the rabbit out of the hat, with everybody. We're all trying to
Yeah.
find that crystal ball that tells us what to do. Reality is, it's a big question at the moment for everybody. We are, like everybody, trying to find our own answer on how, we can tackle not only a better experience for customers, but also essentially using the tools that is available or are available to us at the moment, but also in the near future to essentially enhance, that experience for customers. At the moment with Tata Motors, we are exploring. There's elements we know how to do, and we do it today in the cars in production, but also in starting to explore a bit more in concept cars. But there's also elements that we don't know yet how to handle that, and we're using and exploring a little bit, with the tools to see how we can actually answer that question or that problem. The cabin experience is it's a bit of a, I wouldn't say unicorn, but everybody wants the same thing, but there's multiple ways to essentially get that resolved. One is there's still a function. Yes, the vehicles are no longer just A to B, but they still need to do the A to B. And when you're driving, you can't just it's not a movie theater. You've got to be driving, so you've got to basically still be focused, have everything at hands in terms of like experience. You got to basically be able to operate the vehicle properly and in a lawful way, etc. But at the same time, what can you bring to the customers to make it enjoyable, to make it unique, to make it essentially maybe with a bit of a competitive advantage against your own competitors? I'm talking as an OEM. But also at the end of the day, it's got to please the customer. We got to bring something to the customers. AI is one way for me to. There's two prongs to this. There's one where it's on the process, where it could help us develop something that is beneficial to the customers, and whether faster or better. And there's
Mm-hmm.
another aspect where AI could be used as a tool within the cabin to also maybe process elements that the driver doesn't have to, or simply enhance something that they have to do right now that they have to somewhat be either subpar because they have to focus on driving at the same time, or either don't do as good as they could be because we don't have that in the vehicle yet. So I see AI really down to two ways, and in the recent past we've done the Sierra concept in 2020 where we literally removed for the sake of it, but also trying to test a little bit the customer reactions. All cluster, all nav screens, everything from the dashboard. It was like bring your own device, whether you had a shelf to put it on the dashboard, and basically your call it like that, your Siri or your um, I don't know, Amazon Alexa, or anything that could be your portal, your AI assistant in your device, could be the one essentially giving you the information as you need them operating the vehicle. So that's one way. Or we did it like for example, the Avinia concept recently, where we minimize this to the very very beginning of an AI-driven cockpit, and by this, we say you have, as the operator of the vehicle, you have your screen. That is the minimum you need in order to get, your inputs in the vehicles using voice, using touch screen. But, the screen is very minimized. And the vehicle itself is returning this to you as an output. And that is essentially chosen by the AI brain in the vehicle, whether it's the right time to give it to you on the screen or is the right time to talk to you, for example. That's that's the way we're going at it at the moment, but it's still very much an exploratory phase, really.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
I think it's quite
Really fascinating.
interesting, Aurelian. In fact, the fact that you touched upon that we have to understand that the car would still have to go from A to B is really important. I think while we are making this transition, these are things not to be left behind. And I think it's going to be a key for us to future innovation, I
Mm.
guess. So with that,
Very much so.
I'm having a thought in my mind in terms of Nick. I would like to ask you. We've been also exploring a lot of work with Tata Elxsi on various fronts, where we've
Yes.
addressed requirements in AI around local regions as well as for the global market. So, how
Yeah.
do you see the impact or influence of AI affecting this?
Well, I think one of the things that fascinates me is, let me say, more to do with the kind of process and how we can get even richer insights about what different consumers globally want from their in-cabin experience. So that there's a massive amount of data already out there. Using AI to do that user research, develop very specific personas. I'd almost go as far as to say using AI at least to build the foundations of a specification. So a user in one territory, in one age group, may have a particular set of requirements that are unique to them, and essentially allowing us to build all of that into whatever the HMI is going to be. I think is going to transform not only the quality but the speed at which we can get to that kind of specification. In addition, I would say, and this is, if I may, just a bit of a build on what Aurelian was saying a moment ago. I do think that natural language voice interaction is going to be one of the pillars of. I'm not saying we get rid of displays completely, but actually being able to interact with the car in a much more accurate and seamless and intuitive way. One of the enablers for that, in my view, is going to be very advanced voice processing, and in a sense that I mean it's already happening. There are brands out there that I think Kia launched their EV3 recently. They've done a particular their own version. I think they built it on an existing AI model. But so we're just beginning to see the first steps of being able to interact not only with vehicle systems, which I think will yeah, de-stress drivers if they can do more of it through voice. And on top of all of that, of course, we've got uh, a big increase in, let's say, embedded ADAS systems. So I think for drivers around the globe, if the car is doing more of the safety monitoring and proactively guiding people in terms of what's happening in real time, uh, that also I think is going to lead to a better overall experience for drivers and passengers.
Yeah, quite some insights, Nick, from you. To add to that, a thought was coming to my mind that when we are talking about going local versus global, you mentioned a unique thing about personas as well as talking about voice assistants, how it could be used to make sure that the conversations inside the car are more friendly and accessible to all.
Mm.
Talking about that, I feel that even looking at opportunities beyond just visual, which is, let's say, maybe talk about sound experiences inside, this could
Mm-hmm.
feed into the whole branding aspect of the sound branding aspect of an OEM like Tata Motors as well. And
Mm.
also sound, as we know, sound, music, these are all universal languages, so
Mm.
everyone across the world understands. So these could be wonderful points for us to really connect the audiences from local markets to global markets, and this could really
Yeah,
be a thing for us.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
while we are talking about these newer opportunities, I have a question for Aurelian, where see, I mean, we are all designers where we've continuously adapted to newer technologies right from the initial get go on how let's say we moved from physical presentations to digital presentations. We moved from
Mhm.
clay models to now having digital models now. So I mean, all these things are now taking shape, and we've kind of adapted to our workflows accordingly. So with AI, I see this as a new milestone where we are again seeing the shift in the whole mindset of how we design things, and what's the general process that we follow. And so since Tata Motors has been heavily into leading the direction when it comes to design for in-cabin experiences, uh, how do you see in terms of what has changed in Tata Motors? Are there any best practices to be able to adapt to this newer way of working along with AI? Yep.
So yeah, so I think what Nick was talking about, and then what I've mentioned also in the first question, when he talks about the process really, because that's what you're talking about, what you're asking me. For example, all the batch of vehicles we've got currently on the market have been designed during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody globally, suddenly you were stuck inside and you can't do play. You can't do meetings with people, in conference rooms, with everybody around the table, etc. We all adapted. We had no choice. So
Mm-hmm.
we ended up doing and working in a way during COVID where we adapted and literally worked through the rising of teams everywhere, working in shifts or bubbles, so people couldn't extra. Long story short, AI to me at the moment is going to be the next step of that. We were forced into it and we adapted. We were able to deliver. The question now is, will AI help us gain time? Yes, it will. The only question is we need to change some aspects of things, and we need to also crack a certain amount of elements that we're talking about design work, we're talking confidentiality. There's a lot of fierce competition. We have to make sure confidentiality is key elements of the design studios.
Yeah.
So AI at the moment, one element that I'm carefully watching is essentially the IPs,
Mm.
the intellectual properties, because
Mm.
while we're at the beginning of AI and there's a lot of engines that are really helpful and already producing a lot of good work, who owns that? Who
Yeah.
owns the properties that are being created? And if tomorrow we are Tata Motors, we are using a certain system to create property, who says that this is not going to feed another competitor
Yeah.
eventually for their creation? So the
Mm.
fine line is finding that sweet spot where you can actually do elements to, like Nick was talking about, the persona, creating and identifying who's your customers. And I think as a best practice, there's phases in the design process where you can speed things up. For
Yeah.
example, I'm taking a very random example, but I've got a team of exterior designers. We know the trends. We know what customers want because we've made our homework.
Mm.
The reality is we know, for example, wheels for exterior vehicles will want 5 spokes versus 3 spokes.
Mm.
Just again, random example.
Yeah.
I can use AI to create a lot of directions in 5 spokes in the prompt.
Mhm.
Then at that point, and again, that's just a very basic example. Then at that point, I end up in like a fraction of a second with 100 different proposals.
Mm.
Rather than paying, or using the budget for X amount of designers to do that work, I can generate very quickly high-level concepts that we can choose from for direction. Then the
Yeah.
one we pre-select, we can actually give that to the expertise of a designer to actually take it further, and that becomes the IP, the real, very fine refinements and developments that works with engineering, then CAS developments, etc. That becomes the property of the OEM. So I think
Yeah.
there's clever little areas where we can actually speed things up massively,
Mm.
and that time is better devoted by the designers to actually put the refinements or the unique aspect of each OEM at that point. So when we
Absolutely.
talk about best practice, I think that's where we're going at. Now, if I put it back into the cabin, it's the same with the UI. When you look at the aesthetics, you can create the quickly rough overall themes, and then you have to anyway apply your icon library, your UX concepts that you need to make sure it's a branded solution or going
Mm.
with your electrical architecture compatibility, etc. So you'll essentially shortcut some elements and you'll spend more time into what actually matters. I think that's where the design processes will very much evolve and that will become best practices.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we have been doing internally is looking at building, I would say, a framework for the UI UX. So that there's some pre-established best practice, and then actually to avoid this IP issue, begin to get AI to be trained on, let's say, a closed system. So, we put visual material, we put UX principles into this system. And I think one of the things that fascinates me is from a branding perspective, doing it that way means that it's likely that all those different options that you can generate quickly will actually be aligned to your brand rather than the AI scraping information from all of your competitors, and then you end up in a position where maybe our concept looks a little bit too close to one of our competitors. So I think in terms of process, there's a very interesting trick, and I'm sure OEMs are doing it already, but we're definitely exploring that notion. And by the way, not just in automotive, for some of our product clients, we'll build out a closed system that will essentially allow a brand-focused set of design options to be analyzed.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. I think I gathered a lot of interesting thoughts on that, particularly the one that being a designer myself, I do understand and empathize that. I mean, the core security of the things that you create. We are not really, we are actually concerned about using AI generated assets and then putting it as part of the design, and which directly feeds into the aspect that you guys were mentioning about how a typical flavor of a specific designer comes into their creations. Now I think with AI we'll have to use that, and we'll have to make sure that, like, say, the flavor is still there.
But
Yeah.
that's also the best way to leverage the expertise of the designer.
Yeah, true.
You've got, I don't know, you've got 10, 15 years, 20 years of experience you're in doing something. You don't need to be wasting time on basic things that, a student out of school can do.
Yeah.
Correct.
In that case, you're as a company, your value added is much better, in a phase where it's developing, and you're the sniper. You're doing it, in the first way, and if it's good because you're an expert. All
Mhm.
Yeah.
the work, up front, it doesn't necessarily need to get your attention. So that's, I
Right.
think, much better, much
Mm.
better.
Fantastic.
When Palash, I don't want to take us, let's say, off brief here, but I'd be just conversationally, Aurelian, I'd be interested in your views. So earlier on, you mentioned IP and ownership of data. I think that potentially is also true for customers, for drivers, for passengers. So if we get to the point that the HMI is hyper personalized, of course, many vehicles have now got cameras that are watching drivers.
Yeah,
Um, the
OMS, DMS, yeah.
Yeah, so the notion that if we've got voice, therefore the vehicle is listening to you, um, there could be some big benefits, I think, with AI in terms of a vehicle actually getting to know you as an individual driver, what your preferences are, whether it irritates that you get suggestions for route mapping or not. But so I think there potentially some really amazing experiences enabled by AI in that area. But uh, I guess the counterpoint to that is, once again, who owns all of that data about me and my driving style, my preferences? Does that stay with me forever? And how do we, or how does an OEM address any concerns about data security or any of that stuff? Because I think that's possibly one of the biggest questions to be answered is who's got my data? Does it go elsewhere to get processed and all of that stuff? So,
The reality is going to be very interesting. I mean, my view on it, we're doing this today anywhere with the phones
yeah,
for tech. Yeah. Problem is now the phone has got wheels, and there is also extra layers of data that will come on. Whether your driving style, etc.
yeah,
I think the key is to find that sweet spot where first you simplify the customer's experience.
mm-hmm,
You make their life simpler one way or the other. And then I think after that it's just understanding how, and I'm gonna say it for the sake of it as a very business oriented comment, but it's to monetize that data. Because whether
yeah,
you do that as a customer, that's your data,
mm-hmm,
and you happily or monetary give it to the OEM to process, or
yeah,
you let that go and the OEM does that with some others. Fundamentally, that's what insurance are doing today. When depending on the black box you got on your car, you can
mm,
get a better rate on your insurance because your driving style is safe versus
yes,
somebody that's a bit more aggressive or whatever.
yeah,
So I think it's that ownership aspect is going to be very interesting. I think the main gain, and it's going to end up becoming probably one of the USPs for vehicles with an AI built in or not, will be how the simplifications of the daily things will be. Because for example, if you take a nice vehicle today or an EV vehicle, the first comment beyond just anyway the design or the performances of the vehicle is how much simpler it is to operate an electric vehicle. You hop in, start, the vehicle is ready, etc. If you
yeah,
think you've got an AI layer on top of that, and
mm-hmm,
it's linked to your profile,
mm,
you've got your phone on you, you're approaching the vehicle is set up already. My wife does that the next day. The
mm,
setup of the vehicle is already curated to her liking, etc.
mm,
You can actually play a very, very seamless experience to the customers.
yes,
And then all that data, I think we got to define the data in such way that there's data for operations on a daily basis, and there's data that can be monetized. And I think
mm-hmm,
this is where the next big step will be, because adding AI powered elements or experience points in the vehicles, it's fairly easy. It's just a bit of time, a bit of implementations, a bit of content in the vehicle, but
mm,
fundamentally curating that experience to a worry-free or a very simpler experience to customers will be, I think, key. And it's easy to add stuff. It's not that easy to remove things and make it very simple.
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, so
fascinating,
that's great. So, on a softer note, one thing's been going on my mind, and I am talking on behalf of all the young designers there. where does that leave us young minds? What does all these fancy things that we're talking about, AI doing this, blah blah, where does that leave the creative thinking side of things? How much freedom, or how do you see us getting captivated by this tech?
To me or to Nick?
Yeah, I think it's an open question, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Nick,
Well,
you want to go?
yeah, I've got a pretty strong view on this. I mean, I think um, number one, you whatever tool you're using, whether it's physical tool or in this case AI, there needs to be a vision for what it is that you're trying to achieve. So, in my view, you still need uh, an experienced human to ask the right question in the first place, right? So, are we going in direction A or direction B? And if we're going to pick in direction A, what kind of information are we going to use to make a rational decision? At the other end, if you like, of the process, somebody has still got to have the experience to decide of those 50 AI generated, proposals, which one is most appropriate for users, for brand, for business, and which are not. So, if you ask me, looking at it positively, and I think we have to, these tools should be an enabler to get us to our vision and a series of decision points faster and frankly with less pain, right? So I don't see any removal of the need for, if I can use such a grandiose term, for visionaries that want to do something better, something new, something more amazing, more delightful. And so I think younger designers should look at it that way, that they still need to engage their brain. They still need the critical thinking that will mean at the end of it all, you pick the right one and you put your money behind the right option.
I agree. I agree. For me, it's the removal of all the waste in the process. And at the end of the day, when you're creative, when you're a designer, I don't know, but that was driving me, right away from school to now, is the what's in my head being created and eventually through a process becomes something tangible, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the same here, except that it's going to go faster. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, whatever the tools were, I'm talking again and I'm just saying I wasn't part of that. I learned straight on the digital tools, but vellum, markers, crayons, and pastel, etc. for early days designers,
Mm.
to digital Photoshop sketches,
Mm.
to now Blender,
Mm-hmm.
to later on AI prompt
Yeah.
potentially. But
Yeah.
the reality is the tools evolve and the designers are still there. The
Yes.
designers, Nick was saying, the creative mind and what, it's not not to be too pejorative, but, not a bean counter approach. It's
Mm.
actually a weird mind that is hardly fitting in a box. And
Mm.
you need to use that mind to actually connect the dots. Yeah. You
Yes.
see the trends, you see all the inputs, and you just put them all in one, head, and you come up with a scenario. That's
Mm.
what designers will still need to do. And whether
Yes.
in the end the tools are different, but the
Mm.
reality in the end is customers will buy either a digital experience or a physical product. At the end of the day, it's a tangible element, whether you experience it on daily basis, just chatting with the vehicle, or whether
Mm.
you own the vehicle and you're driving it.
Mm.
So fundamentally, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think the designers still have a major, role to play. You just will see the so-called the good designers, or the one that will need to really, do something about it, is the adaptability. At the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, a designer, whether you work for brand A or brand B, you're not going to do your own, thing forever. At some
Mm.
point, you need to adapt to a brand, to the font
Mm.
vocabulary, to the direction, to
Mm.
the DNA, to the materials, the colors, whatever. You need to adapt. That's the number one quality for a designer. If you can't
Yeah.
adapt, then
Mm.
you're not going to be in the game.
No,
Reality,
absolutely.
it's going to
And
be totally a new tool to play with, and that's another one you got to know in your pockets to use at the right time.
yeah, fully. And I also feel quite strongly that, of course, AI is evolving at an incredible pace, but having a level of human connection with your end customers, being able to actually take a step back and look at what's about to be put into a vehicle and say, okay, it appears to make sense on the spreadsheet, but actually, do we really want this combination of things for our customers? And that's not only a designer's role, but I think design is central to making that decision
Yeah.
or doing that review, right?
You've got a financial, executive in a company, looks at the Excel chart. That costs a lot of money. Take it off.
Yeah, yeah,
The reality is, with AI tools, you will be able as a designer to speed things up and show them the impact of that.
mm,
When
yeah,
today you would have to do a model, you would have to trim it or paint it to a certain level. So it's not just a designer's model, it's actually something that they can understand,
sure.
not a sketch or something.
Mm, mm,
That will cost money, that will take
mm,
time, etc.
mm,
Now put it in context. You put a movie, you put a visual, all that is generating that emotion reaction.
mhm,
You say, oh no, that line item on that chart, if you remove it, it's one-to-one detrimental to the product. Sorry,
yeah,
you're not doing that cost reduction,
yeah,
as an example. So I think
yes,
AI will be if used well, AI will actually be a massive tool to designers.
yes, agreed.
Yeah. I think quite again, like say, I feel now it's safe to say that AI can be intelligent, but then designers will have to just get smarter, I guess, where we are just designing the right thing now. I mean, we are just telling the world that out of hundreds of solutions that are there, this is the solution that we're looking at,
Mm,
and making us more productive, effective in the same sense to be able to address a larger stakeholder ecosystem.
yeah,
And
And
to be
I,
honest, probably remove some frustrations from designers also, because
yeah,
when it goes the wrong way, you will be able to justify a lot more your work, which at
mm,
that point could actually be very much a lot more satisfactory.
yeah.
yeah,
And while you were talking, in fact, I too realized that is this the first time when we are questioning such things? And like you mentioned, there have been progressions in terms of the tools that we've been using. So if we look back, it's not totally the first time when we've done this. So I think we as designers are innate to being flexible. We have to empathize with others. That's our superpower. I guess
yeah.
we have to leverage that. So fair
Yeah,
enough.
the empathy, sorry to interrupt, the empathy part of it I think is really important because when and we do this already, but when we run, let me say, scenarios on what AI could bring to an end customer, that's still done in a conversational way, right? So designers and researchers in a room thinking about, well, if we were going to have an avatar or a digital assistant, how should it behave? How should it not behave? Which specific functions run the risk of being either irritating or distraction or a distraction? And the more the AI offers us in terms of functionality and capability, the more those kind of conversations will need to be had, I think, uh, by designers, researchers, etc. So, and I guess the other thing that really fascinates me is there are some, very complex problems that need to be solved, not just from a design point of view, but from materials, engineering. If we move outside of HMI design, and I just feel strongly that AI is going to be a massive help in bringing some stuff that otherwise would be too complex to develop in time for a given program, too expensive if done using old tools. So I think it's a liberator for designers' imaginations.
Yeah. So, moving on, I guess, see, we talked about the pace of how this new tech is being adopted to. And I personally feel like, say, it's kind of a very subjective topic when it comes to the pace of this evolution or the transition. So, how do you think the world is reacting and should be reacting towards this transition? On what do you see the roadmap like in terms of how this AI would be adopted, whether it's in the next few years, maybe one or two, maybe if we see.
It's happening fast anyway, whether we like it or not. At the moment, when you look at, every 3 months, whether it's Midjourney, it's OpenAI, ChatGPT, etc.,
Mm.
they are learning so fast. It's, like I think we said earlier, feed the beast. It's literally, it's happening one way or the other. The question is, how fast can that be implemented and embedded into what we do on daily basis?
Mhm.
Um, my view on that is it's going to be how fast we can adapt.
Mm.
If the
Yeah.
companies can be flexible, and and I'm probably pointing at startups right now because they would be most agile, but if the companies are flexible, early adopters in some ways, and are betting, put everything there, it's going to go fast because it's going to be compounding. However, some others might not be able to react right away, but they may have a bit more knowledge on doing some ways, some implementations, etc., and that might actually be essentially starting slow but accelerating much faster after. Depends. Again, I think it depends on who you're talking to, what sort of environment and ecosystem you've got to do that.
Mm.
A company that could be very heavy to maneuver because older OEM, a lot of infrastructure to adapt, etc., could take a bit longer to implement that. But they may actually have
Mm.
something strong, and stable right away based on their process.
Yeah.
However, a startup might just turn it on very quickly, and then they might need to do like updates after updates after updates in order to get to that level of stability. Again,
Mm.
each company will adjust at their speed depending on their capabilities, but it's going to go fast. I have
Yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, in terms of AI implementation, there's more than a handful, many brands that so we look back to the beginning of the conversation to do with improvements in voice, and there are other elements that are already in vehicles, right? They're already tested, they're already on the road. So I would say, in my considered opinion, in maybe not even a year, we'll see an explosion in improved smarts inside vehicles. The question then will be the response from customers, and whether there's got to be a kind of a mid-course update once these systems are actually in the vehicle, and we as designers can get some feedback on whether it's going in the right direction or not. Because I think, for me, one of the things that's obvious about AI already is there is the risk of it being a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, it can do amazing things. On the other hand, it can do some pretty scary, hallucinogenic, whatever. So we need to see how that plays out in the medium term. In the short term, I'm sure it's going to be everywhere in vehicle to whatever level. So yeah,
I'll
that
add to that, if you may. Just the Beijing Motor Show, for example, recently.
mm,
Look at the number of cars that have AI embedded elements, where it has, autonomous everything the cars are driving. They are also making calls on, that spot here to park your vehicle is better than that one, as an
yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah,
There will be a lot of elements like that at first will be embedded into the system, some better than others. But one thing that will be also that we can't underestimate, in depending on the market, it will be adopted very quickly. Some others might just see that as a features,
mm,
and you have, oh yeah, I have that feature in my vehicle. Do I use it? Maybe
mm,
not yet,
maybe not. Yeah,
but I have it in my vehicle.
yeah,
It becomes a marketing selling point.
mm-hmm,
However, for mass market adoption of that feature and using it on daily basis, that will depends on the viability, the the how to the easiness to get and use it by customers, and again the pre acceptance, I would say, of the market altogether. So there's a few things like that that will just create stages. But I agree with Nick. It's going to go fast one way or the other, and then we'll see whether it picks up after that, if it's becoming a trend, or whether it's just like early adopters only.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So good. I think it's been a lovely discussion with you both, and Aurelian and Nick. And thanks for sharing such, like, say, good views on, like, say, both the pros and cons of AI and what it means for the world. So one thing that I read is definitely, like, say, there are exciting times ahead. The future is super exciting. I mean, for me as a designer, it gives me confidence to be really able to just foresee that, like, say, we'll have more possibilities to think of, and we'll be able to shape a better world with AI, and that's a
Mm,
very good opportunity for us.
Mhm.
So I guess that now we'll open up for the Q&A with the audience,
mm,
and that's where I see some questions coming up.
mm.
So, so one question from the audience to Aurelian is, how do you see this transition to AI happening? Where, like, say, I hope it's a top down from premium cars and flowing downwards, with OEM like Tata Motors having a wide portfolio of products. How do you see this transition happening to AI?
I think to some level it's going to happen, to pretty much all the portfolio very quickly. The question is, number of features, combination of, I don't know if you need a screen or not. It's going to be a combination of a pack that will make it either much more premium offering to maybe a simpler version, but still, functioning, on lower vehicles.
Mm.
The reality of that is, customers will also tell us, and I'm definitely expecting customers to voice their opinion. We're reading through it, and we're taking them on board. But I think we can't just say it's going to be on the top cars, and sorry, you can't afford the top car, so you're not getting it. That's not how it works. It can't be like that, especially with the Indian market.
Mm.
So we'll need to really adapt our offering to suit, based on price point, of course, but the reality is going to go fast, and it's going to go on every vehicle, I think. And we're already using it internally in the process to actually try to speed things up to make it, faster anyway. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it resonates with the whole aspect of Tata Motors and being a mass market OEM, and then it caters to a wide population in the world, and that's where.
if I may add one point,
Yeah.
we're talking Tata Motors, but if you remember what Avinia was as a brand, with the concept cars and the promise of it, one was essentially the well-being and the overall simplifications of your life as part of the cockpit design. Um, the translation of AI and what it can do in a Tata Motors vehicle might be different than what a premium, Avinia, offering might be. So
Mm.
fundamentally, you may see some functions that you may not find in one car, but some others, on the other, because it's more premium. It might be a concierge on something, and it might be an enhancement of the experience on another. It really is, depending on who the customers are. And you look at Tata Motors, portfolio today, we've got the personas. We talked about it briefly earlier. A certain customer, for example, on a Fearless Nexon, might want something that is very different than an accomplished Harrier or Safari.
Yeah.
So again, the curating of the experience, depending on who the customers, what sort of product, an accomplished, vehicle on that segment versus an accomplished vehicle on a lower segment, the answer might be also different. So again, AI on all that aspects will help us curate and fine tune this, and hopefully, bring it faster.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think great.
I,
It's.
if I may, Palash, I also think, and we probably won't have time in this session to discuss this, but the idea that we'll be able to deliver services, I mean, that might be insurance, it might be parking, it might be, there are many areas where AI could mediate some services. And I think what interests me is whether you've got a premium vehicle or mid-segment vehicle or not, if those services are important to you, then if you're given the option, there's a strong chance that you would pay at least some money for those. So if we talk about a fully fledged concierge service, that I'm pretty sure will need, a bunch of off-board computing and all of that great stuff. Well, the question will be, is it only going to be offered to the driver of a premium vehicle, or is that available to anybody that is prepared to buy into that? If it makes their lives easier and makes it better. So I think there could be some surprises ahead for the difference between a big, beautifully trimmed, therefore naturally quite expensive vehicle, and the kind of services that people will be ready to buy into and pay for.
Completely agree.
I think makes sense. Makes sense. I think using AI as a tool to bring that flexibility to us in the process and the products to be able to cater to each and every individual out there. I think that's the
Yeah,
way ahead.
yeah,
So we do have one more question before we close. This is for Nick. So this is again for from the perspective of design education. So now that we are talking about this new way of working, do you foresee the whole education system in design to go through some changes or some modifications to be able to adapt to these industry demands?
I think inevitably. I mean, not least, you don't have to go very far on, any online channel to listen to some person saying that they're going to help you earn $100,000 a year being a prompt engineer because it's the latest thing. So yeah, for sure, I think that all these AI tools will end up being part of the system. But what's critical for the institutions and the faculty to understand is that that doesn't mean we're saying that we in the industry need designers who are going to assume that all they've got to do is a prompt and then let the system spew out whatever it spews out. No, they still need to understand the craft. They need to understand the detail. And I'm just looping back to a point I made earlier on. They need to understand that at some point, they will need to be the editor of whatever these systems are producing and really be the one to understand and justify why one direction for a given brand or customer is the correct one. And you can't do that without proper design training. But yeah, the tools will be incorporated. They're just like the rest of this conversation. It just has to be done in exactly the right way.
For sure. And yeah, so I think the future of automotive tech is definitely very great, and AI is going to be central to it. So thank you so much, Aurelian and Nick, for the wonderful insights that you've shared. And I extend my gratitude to our panelists for showing their expertise and then sharing all their insights and learnings and their vision so far for the future with AI. Let's continue with this discussion all together with the audience, and definitely thank you for the audience also to be able to engage with us and then actively participate in the discussion. Thank you, and have very safe travel ahead.
Will do. And
Thank you
Palash,
very much.
my thanks to you for doing such a great job moderating.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
everyone.